On today's episode of History in a Minute, the relationship between Steve Jobs and Pixar. Hey everybody, it's Mr. Philip Campbell with Homeschool Connections History in a Minute. I am your bearded, nerdy history guru. Now, we all know the late Steve Jobs as the founder and visionary CEO of Apple, the company that gave us the smartphone, iTunes, Macintosh computers, iPads, every I thing in the modern world. But what many of us don't realize is that Steve Jobs was also instrumental in founding perhaps the greatest animation studio of our age. Of course, I'm talking about Pixar Studios. Now, this goes way back to the 80s. In 1985, the board of Apple forced Steve Jobs out, forced him out of the company that he had founded for various reasons. And Steve Jobs was now looking for something else to do with his creative energy and his money. And so he heard that George Lucas's Lucasfilm was selling off its computer animation division, which was Pixar. And so Steve Jobs bought Pixar in 1986 for $10 million, which was considered exceptionally low. Nobody wanted Pixar at the time, and it was not known what kind of future there was for computer animation. But Steve Jobs thought that this showed promise, and he brought on a guy from Lucasfilm named John Lasseter, who was going to oversee the animation production of the features that Pixar was going to make. And Steve Jobs had this vision of wanting to combine good storytelling with the latest innovations in software that Steve Jobs had been working on. And so John Lasseter pitched to Steve Jobs this story about toys that came to life when nobody was looking. And this, of course, was the genesis of Toy Story. Steve Jobs liked it, and he gave John Lasseter one word of advice, which was make it great, and that was all the direction he gave. So Toy Story eventually came together. It was released in 1995. It was critically acclaimed, huge success. It became the first fully computer animated film to win an Oscar. 2 years later, Apple brought Steve Jobs back on, and Pixar would go on to make many amazing films. It was eventually sold to Disney in 2006. Now, years later, after Steve Jobs was dead, John Lasseter was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he tearfully said that Pixar and all the films that we know and love from Pixar could not have happened without Steve Jobs. So when you think of Steve Jobs, don't just think of Apple, don't just think of smartphones, think of all the great movies that we like that have come to us through Pixar. So now you know. Please subscribe to this channel for more great videos on all aspects of history, and remember, history is awesome.